slide forward. Big picture. So this is the stuff I went out and just did quite a bit of research several weeks ago, and learned as much as I could through Google. Essentially, in 2010, North Carolina property taxes only on the CLT price, so kind of the affordable land trust price. In 2012, Austin, city of Austin, Texas, they full out property tax exemption. This is way in advance of any land trust units in that community. And then in 2022, they defined a couple organizations as eligible CLTs. So they created a language that said CLT properties don't have to pay, there will be no property taxes on CLT properties, but they hadn't defined what organizations were actual CLTs. So that benefit had not been realized, but it looks like it is going to be playing out now. 2022, both Michigan and Maryland introduced full exemption language. Best as I could tell, neither one of those states enacted or approved that exemption language. Atlanta, 2021, so the city passed a $30,000 exemption on property taxes. So if a fair market value is $200,000, essentially $30,000 from that, the homeowner would be paying property taxes on $170,000. So it was a fixed amount off of whatever the fair market value is. Any other examples? And maybe not specific to your state, but maybe have you heard of other states? You had mentioned Washington.
Washington State has passed something that's statewide. CLTs or the properties are assessed at the resale value.
Okay. Anyone else?
And I think they said it took them like 15 years to get.
Okay, all right. And that definitely resonates with some of the research I've done so far. So at least for me, and this is anyone can argue this, the ideal property tax solution would be total property tax exemption. The homeowner, provided they meet some sort of an income restriction, doesn't have to pay property taxes on their land trust property. And then from there, it just becomes, I think, a bit more restrictive assessment on the affordable price, and that would be the case here in Minneapolis, but also Door County and Washington State, as we've learned. Exemption on a set monetary figure, like the Atlanta example of $30,000 off. Percent portion of property tax percentage, 0.75% versus 1% property tax. And this is currently something that we've been trying to push forward in Minnesota. At this point in time, there's a 4D classification, so eligible affordable rental projects, instead of paying 1.25% of the fair market value, which would be the annual tax rate on a property, they get the 4D classification, we'll talk a little bit about this, that property tax rate would be 0.75. What we've been trying to do is reduce the single family or ownership classification of 1% down to 0.75%. And then another example here in Minnesota for lower income households, there is a property tax rebate that lower income households can apply for on an annual basis based on their income. Property tax exemptions. So here in the state of Minnesota, and some of us may already be aware of these things, these various purposes already receive property tax exemption. Manufactured homes, elderly living facilities, domestic abuse shelters, transitional housing facilities, publicly owned housing, the 4D rental classification, as I mentioned, instead of paying property tax on 1.25% of the value, if you qualify as a rental provider, meet income criteria, the property taxes on those properties drops to 7.75 of a percent. And then the homestead classification, there is a benefit to homesteaded properties or properties where the homeowner lives in the property here in the state. And then there's a little explanation about how homesteading is valued here in Minnesota. Valued at $76,000 or less, the exclusion is 40% of market value. You have the maximum exclusion of $30,000 at $76,000. And it kind of gets into the methodology of how that's done here in the state. Questions? So I also, in learning kind of about property taxes in here in the state, is there's pages upon pages of state language that speak to various property tax exemptions. And I need to put this out there that it's not crazy because there aren't people that believe that these things are important, but it's crazy in the sense that certain things in our state are property tax exempt, and yet we haven't been able to figure out a way for low-income households to receive that benefit. And so, again, it's not knocking any of these things. There's probably strong advocates behind all of those things. But as I was going deeper on this, manure pits in the state are property exempt. Churches, which I think a lot of folks know, private cemeteries, monosloped roofs for feedlots. So just a certain percentage of total property tax obligation is exempt. Modular homes, modular model homes are exempt. So if you're a modular home builder, and you have that model home out in front of your large facility, that small percent that's occupied by maybe your entire acreage, that portion of it is exempt. And while somebody went through all that pain and energy for a very, very small footprint is beyond me. Polo grounds and croquet grounds in the state are property tax exempt. I'm not as surprised about this as I am the fact that we actually have croquet grounds and polo grounds in Minnesota, which I never knew we had. I've since found that there's a polo ground up in Maple Plain, that they do all kinds of stuff. And they're also, so if they didn't get it for being a polo ground, they'd get it because they're also a nonprofit, which their mission is to benefit the lives of former racehorses. So there's a nonprofit out there that the proceeds from the polo stuff goes to benefit former. And again, there are people out there that love horses. I'm not knocking it, but I think if we can do it for racehorses or former racehorses, then we hopefully can figure out a way to get this done for low-income households as well. Satellite broadcasting facilities and pretty much anything else tied to energy production and distribution, and then not to forget nonprofits, which is good. I mean, our offices, we don't pay property taxes on. We're able to benefit from that on an annual basis. At the same time, I think we all know of a few nonprofits out there that you kind of scratch their heads and say, how did they become a nonprofit? And they're probably also receiving the same property tax benefit. So the current landscape in Minnesota, legislation was introduced in 2020, 21, and 2022 to reduce the CL tax rate to a 4D level of that 0.75. So 4D, again, is a classification for affordable rental properties. And so what we were looking to do is reduce it 0.25% from 1 to 0.75. The language was an opt-in language, so if you're a land trust and for whatever reason your homeowners didn't want to see that benefit, they wouldn't have to, you'd have to opt into it. And folks over at Rondo were one of their board members was the one that was really keen on getting the language introduced over those years. There was also legislation introduced last year to classify CLT properties in the state. So if you're defined as a land trust, whatever 4D did, CLTs would now be designated as well as 4D, also as 4D properties. There was also legislation introduced by larger rental developers across the state to reduce that current 4D tax rate from the 0.75 to 0.25. So if we back all this out, we just think about homeowners who currently live in homes that we help folks purchase homes in the state. And let's say they're paying 1% currently on a $200,000 home. They're paying $2,000, give or take, a year on their property taxes, right? That would reduce their property taxes to $500 a year if all these things kind of went into motion. So there's some real benefit that would go to the folks that we serve. And this is not to knock affordable rental providers, and especially not to knock affordable nonprofit rental providers who I think do pass on the benefit to the renters. But when I look at the for-profit affordable rental providers out there, I think when they go from that point of the 1.25 and ideally down to 0.25, I still would need to be convinced that 100% of that reduction is going to benefit the renters that they're serving. I'm less concerned about nonprofit providers because I think that there's a mission base and it's helping support do the work that they're doing. But I do think that what we could put forward is that any reduction to land trust homeowners, in our state at least, is going to be a direct benefit to their pocketbooks and their cash flow. Any questions on all this stuff? For me, as I started to really peel it back and understand it, it was pretty fascinating to say, here we are in a state that we're providing some pretty big benefits for some things that I think a lot of the average Minnesotan doesn't know about, and we're still fighting, and potentially it could take us 15 years to see greater benefit for the low-income households that we're serving.
I'm gonna need your slide that says crazy shit for taxes. Just gonna have to throw it on to my local politicians and beat them up a little bit on it.
On this legislation, remind me how far did it advance? Did it make it to the tax bill that did get passed or not?
I believe both were passed by the Senate. Okay. I don't think anything happened in the House this year.
That's good.
My sense is that this is going to be an ongoing push by the larger rental providers. I would argue that if we can hitch our wagons, a small little body of CLTs here in the state, 1,500 total properties, give or take. If we can hitch our wagon to that much more robust horse in this analogy, we could really set into some motion some really positive things for current homeowners and future homeowners.
So if the CLT organization, if they're counted as a nonprofit, why does that tax exemption not go towards the properties that they have in the land trust? I hope that makes sense. Like, why would it be tax exempt?
Like
on
if the
one?
nonprofit owns the land,
Right.
why isn't our land that we own?
It has to
Tax
be where you
exempt.
primarily are doing your operations.
That's the only way that 501c3,
Yeah.
that's what's,
Oh,
okay.
Yeah. And none of this passed either yet. So that it was put into motion. It didn't get passed all the way through. My hope is we have another go at it here in January, and we'll be able to push something through again, and just I think really understanding the landscape, and then I think strategically for us here in Minnesota is talking with those larger 4D rental advocates and say, how do we make sure that we can help reinforce your message and get behind this as well? Because if we can figure this out, it's going to be a huge benefit for the folks we serve. So movement here in Minnesota on a local level. I shared a little bit about this yesterday in the city CLTs partnership session that Brendan and I did. We really were the benefactor of some stuff that the city of Minneapolis was doing. So in 2021, the city of Minneapolis enacted its own shared equity program where they're using a fixed rate formula. There are no properties yet part of this shared equity model, but moving forward they will. As they were doing the projections, they realized that property taxes could impact affordability, and they reached out, the development department, the city of Minneapolis reached out to the assessor's department, city of Minneapolis, and said, hey, can you look into this for us? To the credit of the assessor's department, they went to the state came back and said, yeah, y'all can do what you want to do. And the city assessor's office, beginning in December of 2020, reached out to us and said, send us a file of all the homes that are part of your land trust. So we sent them a file, all the addresses, what the land trust price was, what the fair market value or the appraised value was, and that enacted the process. It's about an 18-month lag period here in the state of Minnesota, but it started the process. The net benefit was that homes that were part of that list in December of 2020, part of the City of Lakes Community Land Trust as of December 2020, those homeowners saw their property taxes drop to essentially, it was based on the effective or the resale land trust price versus the fair market value. So the net of that is over 70% of the homeowners that we assisted saw over a 30% reduction in their property taxes, and over the 300 and some homeowners that were part of the trust at that point in time, combined $270,000 in property tax savings were realized by City of Lakes Community Land Trust homeowners. So we're in a pretty good position in Minneapolis. Cities like Edina, Brenda mentioned yesterday, are looking to see if they can pull this off. I think other cities are having the similar conversations. But my gut is if we can get on a statewide level, property taxes to drop from 1 or even from this reduced rate to 0.25% of their estimated market value, homeowners are going to see a lot more benefit than what they've already received from our organization, and it would benefit a whole heck of a lot more folks.
So Jeff, do you think that the revenue department could issue a letter to like Ramsey County assessor that says, you guys need to take a look at this? Okay, I just, you know, I've been thinking about this
Yeah.
as I was working till 1 in the morning and back up at 5, going, how the hell do we do this? Because it's so silly. It's just silly. When I look at property taxes on a $250,000 house, you know, $4,200 in St. Paul, they can't afford it.
And it's getting way worse, right? Like, it's gotten way worse in the last few years.
That's north to Grant County, and new construction of 4,000. And that's just double lake.
And you throw in 7% interest rates, and we're, instead of serving households at 50% AMI, we're butting up to our 80% threshold, right? And yeah.
I just can't process why they can't do something like that.
I think, you know, there really needed to be kind of a massive push. And I believe that that's happening now with the work that Home is doing, you know, that our municipal CLT is coalition is part of, so that's good. So I think the recognition is going on, and now that Minneapolis has kind of done this, I've been definitely throwing us at St. Paul, City of St. Paul, and Ramsey County, and okay, we need to do something here.
Yeah, I think there's huge benefit, and what I really appreciate about this approach is there's some residual benefit, I think, to the community land trusts. But more than anything, it's about creating, I think, some predictability and really putting, either extending the affordability or putting some money back into the pockets of low-income households. Thoughts, observations? I'm already burning through these slides, so this group may also benefit from some extra time if this presentation or conversation goes short. So fill in slides here. The elephant, I think, you know, the question is, you know, like, how do you eat an elephant, right? It's one bite at a time. And I think to your comments about Washington taking 15 years, not only looking here at Minnesota about what is our strategy for us to start to make some movement on this front, but how do we also start to, on a national level, kind of lift this up and leverage successes off of one another so that we can see some benefit for the folks that we serve. Yeah, so some thoughts on the path forward. Given I put in 3 or so hours just trying to research this, I would love for a student or a class or a group of students to really fully document what's shaking out in every state. Who's got the best deal right now? How do we start to model that? What are the tax laws in every state to better understand why that was possible, and to figure out a path that's going to benefit everybody in the nation, not just Minnesota or not just Minneapolis. Engage. I think to Rondo's credit, they got a board member who is an attorney who really liked this stuff, and he just got geeked out on it, and he got really energized by it, and he was willing to put some language together and work with legislators on it. I think we all need to say, all right, we got this problem. We think we have a good landscape of how it's working nationally. Let's put some attorneys to work on this and see if we can get something happening now. I guarantee if things take off for a community land trust in 10 years from now, we're still fighting this fight, the number of homes in land trust will be a lot harder, and the economic impact, I think, will have a greater fiscal impact on states and government. So in some ways, let's do it while we're small. People aren't seeing the big numbers. $270,000 over the City Lakes Community Land Trust portfolio is huge. But the big scheme of multi-billion-dollar state budget, it's a very, very insignificant amount. And it's actually quite a bit smaller than the 4D effort that's being talked about. So let's slide it in now and then run on the operations that we're going to continue to help more and more households get that CLT status so that they can benefit. Develop a long-term strategy. Realize that we could have some big wins, but more than likely than not, it's going to take some time for us to get there. But strategically kind of lay out a framework, not just locally here in the state, but also nationally to get there. And I think that's going to take some work of our colleagues from other states, but I think also from groups like Grounded Solutions, and or maybe it's a different affiliation who's a little bit more focused on tax policy. And then work the strategy being sensitive to housing market and other community needs and stresses. It feels like despite COVID, we're still working in this place of abundance. Our state here in Minnesota has, I think, the largest budget surplus we've ever had. While cities are struggling, they still have quite a bit of money. That's not always going to be the case. We're going to be running a deficit at some point in time, and ideas like this aren't going to fly. It feels like right now is as rich of a time as any to be really pushing on something like this, where if the state needs to give up a little bit in property taxes, now is the time to do it because they're sitting on such a surplus here in the state. Thoughts?
Is Grounded Solutions thinking about this or doing a national effort at all that you know?
I'm not aware of anything, in part because I think it is a state-by-state basis. And
So they maybe don't see a way forward because it's so
right.
state by state.
But even a piece that would, research and highlight where there have been successes, I think would be really, really helpful. That might be it for me, folks. I think there's maybe one more slide. All right. So realizing the benefits to the community land trust, I think there is some minor benefits. This year, for example, in years past, I've only sent the city of Minneapolis properties that are part of the City of Lakes Community Land Trust if they had a low-income household living in them. To your question, this year, I'm not going to try and do some sort of a trickery thing, but I am going to include the other list of vacant properties that we own to see if the city will look at discounting those as well as part of to see if there could be some slight property tax reductions to our organization that would help us out. So I think there could be some benefit to the community land trust. To the homeowners served, clearly there's, I think, quite a bit of benefit. Benefit to future CLT buyers via the resale. So if it's a new land trust property, as I shared, there's a bit of a lag period. So only, I'll play this forward. End of this year, I'll submit a file to the city assessor's office of all the land trust properties in trust with those same figures. The city staff, or the assessor staff, will do their mumbo jumbo, figure out what all those figures are going to be. That will become part of the 2024 budget for the city of Minneapolis. So in the fall of 2023, the city will know how much money they have to work on their budget. Homeowners will not see the benefit to their property taxes if it's a new property that wasn't already part of the land trust until property taxes spring 2024. So it's kind of a long evolved process. For a resale, let's say I'm a current land trust homeowner. I've lived in my home. 2022, I saw a 30% reduction in my property taxes. That is what's now being reflected in my Hennepin County property tax statement. When I'm a mortgage lender let's say I'm now getting ready to sell my home in 2022. I list it, there's a purchase agreement, that buyer is going through the mortgage approval process. That mortgage loan officer, their underwriter, servicer, not the servicer, but their, I'm sorry? Processor, thank you, is doing the work and figuring out how much that household can qualify for. They're now looking at that reduced property tax amount. So in theory, that household that could maybe only get a $150,000 mortgage might now be able to get a $155,000 or $160,000 mortgage because they're now basing that lower property tax figure into what the household can get a mortgage for on that property. So I think there is going to be a benefit as this plays out to future buyers. Again, if anything, it's just not going to hurt as bad given the interest rates that are shooting up, but I think it will help them from an affordability perspective. Monetizing leverage in funding applications. That $270,000 saved essentially is coming out of the city of Minneapolis. And there's a whole bunch of things that come from our property taxes. But essentially, that's $270,000 in 2021. That was a concession of sorts from the city of Minneapolis. And we can now count that as leverage when we go in and make applications to other levels of government. And then developing a holistic story to CLT stakeholders, right? Like, a land trust home ownership, the homeowner doesn't get, as much equity out of it. No, but you know what? Every month, they're saving $50 or they're saving $100 on their property taxes. That's $100 or $1,200 a year. Multiply that by 10. We're at $12,000. There's some real money there that a household otherwise would not have benefited from had they not been part of the land trust. You add that on top of access to DPA they otherwise wouldn't have been able to, all these other things, and it starts to I think counteract some of the what I'll say sometimes is the negative concerns about community land trust. But there's some benefits now that we're able to lift up and talk about as we talk about the benefits of land trust home ownership as well. Thoughts? Other thinking on that?
Jeff, one of the things that we do, and maybe we shouldn't emphasize this so much, but one of the things is community land trust buyer, they're a taxpayer, they're on the tax rolls, they're paying taxes, so that's looked at as a good thing by local electeds and councils and things like that. But on the flip side, we're looking at our equation and we're saying these new construction homes, they're in areas where people pay $5,000 a year for taxes. At some point when it ramps up, those people, $500 a month in tax payments, that's just not going to be sustainable. So we really need something like that, but how can we say both sides, like they're paying taxes, but hey, we don't want them to pay too much taxes.
Yeah, I think it gets to the nuance. And early on when we started, that was one of the greatest concerns coming out of the community. It was like, well, they're going to pay the same property taxes as what I would have to as their neighbor. And the argument is, well, if I'm paying property taxes so that the fire show up and the police show up at the same rate as the land trust homeowner versus a market rate homeowner, then that argument was good. But I also think like if a household, this kind of equitable taxation, if a household is not going to realize the full benefit of depreciation, should they also be? Can we make the argument that maybe they don't have to pay the fair share of the property taxes going in and going into it as well? And for some communities, it might be a tougher push, right? But I think while we're still small, it is a relatively small number and something that we can kind of lift up and push forward.
Have any of these benefits that you talked about, have any sort of floated to the surface and ringing true with any electeds? Or like, what message, if we can be delivering one or two messages, what should that look like?
I think it's, property taxes for everybody are increasingly becoming an impediment. And if we're really serious about affordable home ownership, setting folks up for success, then we should consider this. I've been really kind of quiet about the benefit we've seen in Minneapolis for fear that it's gonna get on too many people's radar. To be honest, I don't know if the mayor and I don't know if city council members know that this is going on. No one's said to me otherwise that it's just not between the development department and the assessor's office, and they're the only ones that are really aware of this. At the state level, I think we've been pretty open to say we should be pushing for this, and I don't feel like it's been hit with too much resistance, in part because we're riding the wake of the 4D classification. We're already doing it, and again, it's very nuanced because I have strong beliefs between for-profit and nonprofit rental developers and the benefits that they do and don't receive. But I think if we can say, this is a direct benefit to low-income households, it's going back in their pockets or it's benefiting them directly. Current 4D is going to the developer, and it's coming off their annual operating costs. And I think when we start to really pull it back, and I think this varies, and it's pretty nuanced for us, because I understand in greater Minnesota, organizations and communities are serving typically higher income households. They're still, typically below 80%. But at least for our organization, on average, we're serving households at 51% AMI. We can stack pretty darn close to any 4D developer and say, look, we're serving kind of the same income households. Let's apply this thing and see if we can make it work for low-income homeowners as well. I think there's opportunity at the state level, and again, kind of if we can work closely with what the affordable rental 4D folks are doing, make sure that embodying language that counts CLTs as eligible 4D, then I think we have something here. And I think it's going to do a lot better for homeowners than the deal that we've been able to get for homeowners in Minneapolis overall.
Maybe go back to that. How were you able to get that deal with your Minneapolis homeowners? You just worked with the city departments?
The development department reached out and said, hey, we're gonna have this conversation with the assessor's office. Do you see any issues with this? And I said, I don't. Let's see where it goes. And then it went. That was the only idea. I was not objecting to them doing something better for the folks that we serve. And that was, yeah. I wish I could take credit for it, but that's how it played out.
Did they go to a conference or something, or what happened that they thought of this? And
Your former staff person worked in the development?
Yeah.
Well, I think in Shane, we've done, so because this change was going out, we was like, look, we got to communicate this to homeowners. So I do believe that our city assessor, Rebecca Malgrim? Rebecca. She's a total geek about assessing, and I think she's a very, very much advocate for low-income households. And so I think she saw it and she said, yeah, let's see if we can do this, and she did it. And then her staff joined too, but she's the one that a couple times a year comes online and we do these virtual trainings for homeowners, how to understand their property taxes and how it benefits them. And she's always the one on a Saturday morning to give up 2 hours to do this for us. So I think huge kudos to her, because I kind of credit her with all this all played out.
Yeah. Jeff, I have a good question here from a homeowner that I haven't been able to answer.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to make you read this.
They're not swearing at us, are they?
No,
All right.
you're not.
Are you setting them up right there?
That we come up with this whole...
Hi, Shane. I was wondering if other CLCLT owners are running into issues with their property tax refund. All right, so this would be the low-income property tax refund that lower-income households are eligible for. So I may not be able to answer this one. I filed my refund using the tax amount paid in 2021, but the Department of Revenue revised it using the tax
Income, tax refund, so they made some changes to be able to, that the homeowners would still be able to realize more, that wouldn't impact them as
all right.
much. So that's just FYI. And as we move forward with that work, let's make sure that we push that forward.
Instead of like giving up the low income refund in favor of the 4D, it's like, let's keep both.
Correct. Which did not get any opposition from, Republicans or the Democrats that were at the table. That was good.
Other thoughts? Wave a magic wand, what would we do?
What other messaging can we think about if we were to look at some indirect benefits that having reduced taxes would do for a community to your, benefit? It's, outside of benevolence, right? Like we want to be nice and charitable people. We are long-term stewards of public funds. And, we're going to ensure that there's always a low to moderate income home buyer in that home. The benefits just to the community alone of having, families that are in stable long-term housing, which is more of a benefit than rental housing is. There has to be some other indirect kind of, some ways that we can try to figure out monetizing some of the indirect causes of what this could be for a community and for, to humanize the story a little bit more. I don't know. Think about that.
Related specifically to property taxes.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I didn't start.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm trying to, in my mind, try and add up all those benefits
Yeah.
to say it's not just property taxes. It's the fact that the household could get a purchase agreement in place that then allowed them to apply for the down payment forgivable assistance that they received. That once they live in the home for 5 years is forgiven, and now that's additional equity that they otherwise wouldn't have.
Right.
It's the amount that they were previously paying in rent, maybe more than what they ended up paying PITI for their land trust property. It's figuring out and calculating, while it is a 30-year mortgage, do the calculation that they've lived in their home for 84 months, and we can run those numbers to say they've now been able to pay off, assuming they haven't refinanced or done something weird, we now can calculate that they've paid down X amount in principal on their home that they otherwise would not have been able to because they wouldn't have been able to get into home ownership. I think there's a lot of things that we can try to do to monetize the benefit. It's a bit of a stray, but this year was the first year, and this is just talking on the other sessions, talking about resale pricing, right? Is that generally speaking, homeowners that we serve are pretty happy with us. I'd say maybe not half the time, but decent amount of the time, when a homeowner gets to resale, they get pretty amped up because they realize, especially in this market, how much their home has appreciated and how much their walkaway amount is. And so it was getting pretty tense last year, and so one of the strategies is like, all right, well, let's send out a homeowner. Let's make sure that's not a surprise. We have a pretty good idea of how much homes are on an annual basis because the city of Minneapolis does a good job of meeting home values by neighborhood, and we can apply that percentage increase or decrease to whatever the home price was, and within reason figure out what that home is going to be worth without having doing an appraisal. Let's do a sample calculation of what, if they sold their home today, what their home would be worth, what their takeaway would be with, and run some of these other calculations. So we sent out this letter to all homeowners earlier this year. I think it spawned some really good conversation. I think it spawned a whole bunch of bewilderment about why we sent this darn letter. I think some folks got frustrated with us because it just brought the reality sooner than what they would have had they decided they were going to resell at some future time. And I don't know if we'll do it again this year or not. I looked at you, Shane, to say, was it worth it or not? We tried it, and at least we can say we tried it. Right?
I definitely think it was worth it. A lot of people we had definitely mixed feelings about it because some people wanted to pay the taxes because they were hoping to get more back, But I think it was more just me having to deal with the conversation was like, this is gonna work out for you. So it's about educating them about just taxes itself too, where they didn't understand where the resale process comes from and forgot about it.
And then some people got their property taxes, their statements, and they called and yelled at us. What are you guys doing? My property went down in value. And we had to back it up and say, no. What you're paying property taxes on is actually quite a bit less now. Your property, go to Zillow, go to the what's going online, and you'll see that the property value has actually gone up quite a bit. But what you're paying, your effective tax rate, property tax rate, has actually gone down. And I think the net was probably good because we had the opportunity for a lot of conversations with folks that we otherwise wouldn't have. Sometimes I think it created some anxiety that certain homeowners just didn't do well with, but the net was probably a good thing for us to send out that letter.
People just don't know how to read property tax statements itself too, so that was also an issue.
So Jeff, this may be a stupid question, but how does the trash service work? Do you have private trash service or does the city?
It's the city.
So the city does and you pay it on your property taxes?
Nope, we paid a water bill.
Oh, you pay it on your water bill, okay. I'm just,
Yeah, you all have a funky thing going on over there. Yeah.
And they are.
seriously, I mean, we have an owner who's in foreclosure. She's a single person. I'm not sure how much she eats. Not a lot, very little. We feed her when she comes to our office and get her free food, but she doesn't eat a lot. And, it's $90 a month for trash service and she doesn't pay it and it gets assessed to her property taxes and they won't let you share trash. You can't share trash when I lived there, we shared with 3 other households and one of us each paid it quarterly and all was good. And now they just, no, you can't opt out.
And you'll get fined if you don't.
Well, you also have private vendors, don't you? Or do you have?
They have, I don't live there anymore, so I don't claim it. But they have, you have to use a certain trash hauler.
In a certain area.
If you live on the east side of St. Paul, it is trash hauler A. If you live in Rondo, it's trash hauler B. If you live in Merriam Park, it's trash hauler C. And you don't have a choice. So it's organized trash. And it's crazy. My community has organized trash in a sense that they have 3 trash haulers you can pick from. You pick 1, 2, or 3, and they don't care, and you can share trash with your neighbors if you want to share trash, get a bigger cart. That's what I do. I share trash with 4 of my neighbors still, and that's how we work it. It's, in today's world, it's pretty silly. And a good portion of her property tax statement is delinquent trash.
So it does play out the same way in Minneapolis. If you don't pay your water bill,
It gets assessed.
it gets assessed to your
Yeah.
property taxes.
Yeah. But the whole trash thing, and water does the same thing also in St. Paul. They'll assess for it. But the whole not being allowed to make a choice for trash, it just makes me crazy.
You opt out.
I don't
No.
I don't think so.
And then you can get an extra can.
You can get an extra?
You can get an extra can, pay more. I don't think you can pay less.
Pay more than I paid, we're paying more than when we had contracted service.
This is where this conversation is.
Sorry.
No, it's good. It's filling time. I'm done. Yeah, so we can talk about whatever we want to talk about.
It just doesn't,
But that's under
it
water.
does not help low-income homeowners. It just is, and the small landlords that own duplexes have to have organized trash. So they might own 2 duplexes next door where they could have 1 small dumpster. Now they have to have these city carts that they pay probably twice as much for.
What about dumped items? Is that an issue in St. Paul?
Depends. Yeah.
So to the credit of Minneapolis, folks don't know this already, you get 6 vouchers every year as a taxpayer.
We get 2.
Oh, you have vouchers in St. Paul? All
Well,
right,
they're
all right.
not vouchers, you can get 2 except for Waste Management's like, we're not doing that this year.
Oh.
Right.
So But you can take up to 6 truckloads essentially of stuff and drop it off at a transfer facility for things, and that's included in your trash or your water bill payment every year. And I think and they're still dumping, and a few times every year we find a mattress on one of our vacant lots and stuff like that. But I think it does reduce the amount of dumping in the city because we are trying to at least make it easier for folks to take their stuff to the dump.
Oh, I think there's still a dumping problem in St. Paul. And I'm only saying that because I'm friends with some of the DSI, Department of Safety and Inspection folks, and I hear about that frequently. And they've kind of changed the rules on that too. So if someone dumped it in your alley, you could call and the city had garbage trucks and they would come and pick up the junk. Well, now if it's specifically on your apron for your garage, they won't pick it up. So you have to like push it into the alley and block the alley and call the city to if somebody illegally dumps. It's like really dysfunctional.
All right, any other bad city rules? We're gonna go down this rabbit hole.
Any idea how, well, I know we just talked about, I'd just be curious for those, after hearing this and kind of talking through it, what other things should we consider doing, I guess?
At the Minnesota CLT level, I've heard I currently serve as the chair, but I've heard pretty loud from our membership that we got to push this 4D thing at a hard level. So making sure that it's on, there's an advocacy group for affordable home ownership providers here in the state, making sure it's on that home ownership Minnesota agenda this year as a priority item. I don't see any reasons why that won't happen. So it'll be something that we're paying our lobbyists to heavily push forward. At this point, I feel like I won't say that's everything we can do, but I think individual conversations, all those kinds of things that we individually want to be doing to do so. Thinking through who we want to be the author and signing on and all that kind of stuff is our next steps. I think it would be very helpful, as it seems like this is an issue or an opportunity for all of us, let's keep elevating this upward on a national level.
I think we have to do it as the coalition and through home, because I can see what's going to happen. Why does somebody want to buy my house in Crystal when they can go right across and buy your house and pay a lot less taxes? And it's great that Edina's going to try to do what Minneapolis is doing, but now I serve all the communities right around Edina. I'm going to have people saying, I don't want that house, I want to be there. I want to be Edina. You guys are going to get people saying, I don't want to be in St. Paul, I want to go over by Jeff. So I think we all got to get on board, and it needs to be a statewide initiative.
Yeah.
Benefit all of us.
All right, Minnesota's CLT organize. All right, Wonder Twin Powers activate. Okay, I'm home.
One of the things that came up in the city CLT partnership conversation yesterday, Aaron Mirapol was talking about this, I'll call it, for lack of a better term, the large environmental infrastructure funding that was just passed, and thinking through, and I think we all can, and this, I don't have any of this information, but if there are opportunities, as we're talking about water bills and trash bills, also thinking about electricity and gas bills, to say, I think there's opportunity, and it may take another year for all this information to come out, but making sure that we're sharing and really understanding where the benefits are on the affordable home ownership front. Because if we can get in front of that and start doing some rehab or retro, kind of retrofits to land trust homeowners that are going to reduce the operating costs, I think there's a huge benefit in kind of seeing how those funds can help homeowners as well.
So after we talked about that and then driving home last night, one thing that I'm seeing in a lot of the properties, we do acquisition, rehab, resale. Because we are buying older homes, every one of them has that failing sewer line from the house to the street, which is a lot of money. So if there is excess, is that an infrastructure that maybe land trust could
So West St. Paul has a sewer, you have to have the sewer inspected before you sell your house. And if there's a problem with it, you gotta either figure out how to pay it, you have to negotiate it with the buyer that it needs to be done in a certain period of time, and they can apply for sewer assistance if they meet certain income limits. And I personally think it's a good deal from working in St. Paul. We had a lot of folks whose sewers failed like months after they bought their houses. And I only experienced it because I had to sell my brother's house after he passed away, and he had a sewer problem. And I had to fork out $5,000 to get his sewer fixed to sell the house. Does any place else? I know St. Paul does not have it. Does
Probably see
anyone-
10 to 15 failed sewers a year of
Right.
homeowners, so it is a significant issue for us.
And 5,000 is a pretty cheap fix,
Yeah.
Well,
actually.
yeah, they just
See
lined
more.
it because it wasn't so bad that they were
We have
able.
If you're digging it
assistance.
up, it's 10 to 15.
You don't have the
Right.
assistance now.
No, I mean, I'm assuming this is a remedy that, I don't know if it's a statewide remedy or a Minneapolis remedy, that if somebody doesn't have the money to pay for it, they can spread the cost out on their property taxes over, is it 5 years?
Yeah.
But it still costs the same, right? You just,
Yeah, that's, my brother's was tree roots that, and it cracked. He had an old, his house was built in 18 something, so it had an old clay sewer line, and they just, but they were easily able to access it, and they just shoot this liner down, and it like blows up, and
$100 a foot though.
yes, it is. And I paid five grand, so. Mhm.
Yes, I do think more and more buyers are opting for that inspection though. It's not required in Minneapolis, but more and more buyers are, and encouraging folks. And when we've done AC rehab in the past, we didn't scope and look at it, and there were a couple instances where, rightfully so, the homeowner came back to us and was like, look, I bought it less than a year ago, you all should have known about this. And so we paid for it after the fact, where we all know it, you don't have the funding sources after the fact, so it came out of our operations. And so since then, we've learned to factor that inspection cost into the front end as we're doing our scopes, so that we don't get stung on the back end. If we need to bite the bullet and do it, we'd much rather do it and know that's not going to be an issue for future home buyers.
There's, with that Energy Act that has been passed, there's an organization called Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, so statewide, but the northern Minnesota representative happens to be a community land trust homeowner, a one-roof homeowner as well, and so he's helping us with understanding that act and what's going to be happening. And we've also been working with our homeowners to help them install solar power and raise money to install solar on CLT houses. And so this is just kind of like a sidetrack thought, but he thinks that if a nonprofit owns these, retains ownership of the solar panel, that they'll get 30% cash back of the cost. But it has to be the nonprofit. Like right now, we've installed, I think, 8 solar arrays on individual CLT homes, but the homeowner is the one that signs the contract and essentially is the owner of it. But he thinks that if we work it out somehow where one roof would be the owner of this solar array on the CLT house, that there's just 30% of the cost is just cash back. That, you know, I mean, he doesn't totally understand, but it's like, we're gonna keep talking about this, yeah.
Well, so you get 30% realized of whatever you spent at taxes, so you get to write that off on your taxes, and then you get, depending on how much, you know, you also get $500 back a year from Excel Energy, and then any of the excess for here, because we have solar panels, then we get any excess is sold back to Excel Energy, and then we get paid out on that. So it's a direct if we can fundraise for it, it is really a direct benefit for the homeowner to realize, more cash for themselves. And, but I don't know, because then who's paying for, who's really benefiting then from, like, the dollars that come back from Excel Energy. So maybe allowing them to have something to write off on their taxes, but then those real dollars that come in every year, but those coming back to the nonprofit. I mean, kind of a good win-win situation. Just saying, that's how it works with how it worked for us when we got solar panels, which really provides for over 100% of our electricity. That's good. It's good thought. Good think through.
Any other brainstorming while we're all at it?
Can I ask a completely different question? Are there any other it sounds like everybody's using the appraisal-based formula. Is that correct, or is anybody else that's doing this?
I think in Minnesota, it's the primary.
Everybody's appraisal
Exclusive for these.
based, with the exception of the city program now that our organization will actually be administering on behalf of the city of Minneapolis, but that's a 2% fixed rate approach. What was the kind of the process that y'all used to end up with a fixed rate?
We took, actually twice, we took the grounded solutions class, which is the affordable pricing, sounds like probably what they're doing over there. Affordability, affordable pricing, and then we ended up hiring Julie Brenner from Opal in Marcus Island, who taught the class to analyze like 50 years worth of our real estate data and our rent levels and our income levels. So she walked us through it, graphed and charted like appraisal based, fixed based on whether it would be CPI or AMI or whatever, or then just a plain fixed formula based on the purchase price. And that was the one that she suggested doing. It seemed to work out with our market, and it was so much easier and simpler. Like, we can tell people when they're buying a house how much cash they're going to get when they sell it in 5, 10, 15, 20 years based on what they paid the mortgage down on and on the equity.
Can I ask, just because we haven't been able to get a direct answer out of the city of Minneapolis, I'll let you want to handle this, but what happens in a severely depreciating housing market?
Well, that's part of the reason that we picked that, because Door County's never had. I mean, we're a significant second home destination, so that's one of the reasons we needed and wanted a CLT. I think if we were a different, more rural area, that would maybe be a problem. But even in the recession, our home values didn't really go down. So, I'm actually thinking that we might have picked too low a number, because we picked 1%, which is what she had recommended also, and so she thought was fine. And I'm thinking now with what's been going on the last couple of years that we might eventually start getting some pushback, because it's really low.
How do folks handle, well, this is something that we've been dealing with in the topic of solar panels or PV. How are folks handling that as a capital improvement?
Our appraiser that we work with a lot, well, no, so when we were looking into doing these solar arrays with CLT homeowners, I called 4 appraisers in our area to ask what, is it a capital improvement? What would the amount be? And all 4 of them were like, nothing. It's not a capital improvement. It shouldn't, depreciate the value. But he's just like, well, yeah, all 4 of them were saying that.
No adjustment?
No, yeah, because it's like, either some people are going to see that system and be like, oh my gosh, I got to deal with a solar array, and and it's not going to add significant value to some homeowners. Some homeowners would be like, oh my God. That's the coolest thing. So yeah, they did not see, at least in our market up there, that, it's just not a capital improvement.
That's what we found too.
That's what we found too. But we still considered it a capital improvement anyway, understanding that the homeowner acknowledges there's a depreciation in the solar, so.
So yeah, as an organization, you're deciding to put a value on it.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions that you don't think you're gonna get answered here, but?
Just a quick question, if anyone gets CDBG money for paying off specials on individual lots? Just a question, if anyone else.
Did you hear that?
Say it again.
If anyone else,
Yeah.
so,
Most of us aren't gonna understand it because your taxes with your specials are so different.
well,
than
that's what I
we-
was wondering if anyone else's, that, you know what I'm talking about. So in the Fargo Moorhead area, all around there, specials aren't paid by developers, they're paid by individual homeowners. And so new developments are paying, $70,000 in specials on top of the price of their home. And so, because it's either that or it's built into the price of the home, and if someone pays it, that's just how it's set up. So that was my first, I guess that's the first question, is anyone else set up like that in Minnesota? And do they get CDBG money for helping pay those down at all? But if none of you have that, then never mind.
No, but in Rochester, they're piloting, so this kind of sounds a little bit like that, in a way. They're piloting this fee waiver system. So if you develop a new unit, they'll waive up to $20,000 in fees. So like the building permit, there's this plant infrastructure fee, which just goes to the sewer plant, but it's like $4,000 per unit. So all these fees that the city collects through the course of construction, if you build, I can't remember what the threshold is, but something like under $350,000 home, and you're going to serve a certain AMI or below, then you get reimbursed all these fees.
Sure, but your developers are paying those fees. They're getting reimbursed, but they're getting the $20,000 incentive.
They're paying it and then getting reimbursed, so it's a
Sure.
wash.
Okay. Okay, never mind. Just special.
Yeah, I'm not aware of anyone that those specialists have, every once in a while there'll be a little something, but it's not,
Oh,
if we're buying something from the city of Minneapolis, for example, we may have to know. But we usually know about it well in advance. It's not a huge amount of money. Other thoughts? Thoughts on this presentation? I don't know. Feels like it is what it was. I don't know if I could have enriched it any more than what I put into it. But hopefully it was informative.
Thank you.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think folks have 20 free minutes and another 30 on top of that, so
Look at you, Jill.
get outside, yeah.
Crazy staying early.
Thanks.